there's a new award-winning 4-grain straight bourbon whiskey that's been taking the market by storm, Penelope Bourbon. Penelope's balanced yet flavorful taste profile comes from a unique blend of 3 bourbon mash bills. Currently available in 3 expressions, 4-grain, barrel strength, and toasted, Penelope is remarkably smooth and flavorful. So whether you're sipping neat or using in your favorite cocktail, Penelope is perfect for you. Penelope Bourbon is available in select markets, as well as online at penelopebourbon.com.
In 2009, director Jason Reitman and star George Clooney gave the world a poignant drama that illustrated the utmost importance of healthy community.
In 2022, we once again revisit a podcast favorite brand.
The film is Up in the Air.
The whiskey is Rebel Distillers Collection.
And we'll review them both. This is
the Film and Whiskey Podcast. Welcome to the Film and Whiskey Podcast, where each week we review a classic movie and a glass of whiskey. I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And this week we are looking at the 2009 Best Picture nominee, Up in the Air.
Your resume says that you minored in French culinary arts. Most students, they're working the fryer at KFC, but you bust tables at Il Picatore to support yourself. And then you get out of college, and you come and you work here. How much did they first pay you to give up on your dreams?
$27,000 a year.
And when were you going to stop and come back and do what makes you happy?
Good question.
I see guys who work at the same company for their entire lives, guys exactly like you. They clock in, they clock out, and they never have a moment of happiness. You have an opportunity here, Bob. This is a rebirth. Now, if not for you, do it for your children.
What won in front of it?
You know, it's funny you should ask, because I vividly remember this Oscars race, because I went to see this movie in the theater. I absolutely loved it. And I was really pulling for this movie. And I remember seeing an article written about a week before the Oscars that was like, it's Up in the Air or Avatar. It's one of those two. And like, the Hollywood people started to buzz in that last week. You started to hear like maybe this little indie movie called The Hurt Locker could really come in and sweep some of these awards. And I would say it was in the last couple weeks of that campaign, The Hurt Locker just took over everything. And I feel like Up in the Air really suffered as a result because it wasn't nominated in a bunch of the like technical categories the way Avatar was. So this movie, it went from being like in the lead to winning Best Picture to being pretty much forgotten by the Academy.
Ugh. That is super disappointing because, yeah, Hurt Locker obviously wins it. That's crazy, dude. I will say I've never seen Hurt Locker. I've heard it's a good movie. Is it one that you're a fan of?
You know what? I like it, but I actually think that the follow-up that the director and writer did 2-3 years later called Zero Dark 30 was way better. And then, of course, Zero Dark 30 doesn't win Best Picture. So it's just like, yeah, it's a vicious cycle.
For our sports fans out there, I feel like the Oscars are weirdly similar to like the yearly MVP race.
Yeah.
In like any of the major sports. You can argue for hours on end, like Derrick Rose versus LeBron, like, you know, oh, it was just voter fatigue, you know, all this stuff. And it's wild how no matter what humans do, we really like to rank things and decide which one's the best. And whether it's in the art categories or the world of sports, we find ourselves in these conversations all the time.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and this movie came out in 2009, so it was 1 year after the Dark Knight controversy, where, you know, the Academy for so long had only been nominating 5 movies, and then the Dark Knight didn't get nominated for Best Picture, and people lost their shit. And so, like, the next year, they were like, we're re-expanding to 10 nominees. We haven't done this since, like, the 40s. And it's been, you know, somewhere between, I'd say, 8 and 10 nominees ever since, based on how the preferential ballot works. But this movie made that field, but, you know, couldn't bring it home.
Yeah, man, it's disappointing because, Bob, this is a damn good movie.
It's such a good movie, man. And this was actually one that you and I were kind of quibbling back and forth about who's going to put it on whose list, because we wanted to make sure it got featured somewhere in this season. I've really been wanting to talk about this one for a long time.
As soon as we like kind of, conceived of this season, I immediately, like, this was one of the first movies I was like, oh, if I got to choose 15 movies for a season, Up in the Air would be literally one of my first choices.
I'm so glad you did, man. And I think maybe it's time we start talking about the movie itself. But before we get into Brad Explains, we do want to encourage you, if this is your first time listening to the podcast, or if you're a longtime listener, please subscribe to the show, give us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. If you'd like to get a little bit more involved with the podcast, consider joining our Patreon. We have 3 different levels of Patreon membership, starting at only $3 a month. You get bonus content that's exclusive to Patreon members, you get early access to every episode, and you don't hear all these pesky bleeps that we have in the regular episodes. So if you'd like to hear us just really get blue with our material, consider going to our Patreon at patreon.com/filmwhiskey.
Or honestly, one of the best ways you can support us, just tell a friend. If you enjoy what you're listening to, share it with your friends. Give us a like on Spotify. Give us a 5-star rating. We love you guys. We've seen so much cool growth over the years with the podcast, and we just want more people to feel the love.
Well, Brad, I'm ready to feel the love that comes from Brad Explains, America's favorite segment. Brad, we have put 60 seconds on a timer, and it is your job to break down the plot of this movie. You're in a privileged position today, Brad, because this is a movie that you've seen a number of times, so you should be able to distill it down for us pretty easily.
Yeah.
You've got 1 minute on the clock, Brad. Can you do it?
Ryan Bingham, played by George Clooney, is a downsizing expert who travels across the country firing people for bosses who are too cowardly to fire people themselves. As such, he has put millions, with a capital M, miles up in the air, flying around the country. In the midst of this downsizing is this thing called technology. Video chatting is coming about. And so the company he works for is in the process of figuring out how they can ground all of their traveling agents and transition to a virtual firing system. So in the process, he takes a young expert in the field of virtual firing on the road with him so she can learn the ins and outs of the job. Along the way, he meets a beautiful businesswoman who they have dalliances together.
5 seconds.
And Ryan learns how important it is to have people in his life.
Nicely done, sir. Brad, where would you like to start today? I have a couple ideas, but I kind of want to hear from you because it's rare that I pick a movie that you are also this excited about talking about. So,
yeah.
Well, where would you like to start today?
I think a mixture of talking about the performances, but also the directorial decisions on how to portray the characters.
Okay.
And so the reason I say that is I think that this might be one of George Clooney's best performances.
Absolutely.
And I think the reason is because Jason Reitman, this is George Clooney. He's like the world's sexiest man. I'm sure he's been voted that many times over. But I think what's interesting is how normal they make him in this movie. Like, he doesn't have perfect hair in every scene. He's not always dressed to the nines. Like, he weirdly comes across as like a above average, attractive, yet still normal businessman who wears normal businessman suits, who just looks like a good-looking, middle-aged guy going to a tech conference. Like there's nothing too crazy abnormal about George Clooney. He feels so stinking relatable in this movie, and I think that's a mixture of Clooney's acting and the way that Reitman and the costuming team and the script treat him.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone has done the transition to being like a quote unquote, like a silver fox as well as Clooney has in the last 30 years in movies. Like
maybe Steve Carell?
Oh, that's true. Maybe. But he hasn't had like the movie star juice that Clooney has. And I think Clooney found roles for himself that still kept him, in really successful franchises. Like look at the Ocean's franchise. But even in those movies, he's not Like, he's not going the Tom Cruise route, which is exciting in its own right. But, Tom Cruise is like physically pushing his body beyond its limits and doing things that we've never seen a movie star do in terms of the danger involved. Clooney's like, listen, I'm going to be a guy that robs a safe in a casino. And you might see me put on like a tight black t-shirt, but I'm not going to be doing flips all over the place. He's really aware of his age. And I think that really kept him appealing to a lot of people. Like, I don't just mean like in terms of attraction, but just, knowing who you are and being comfortable with it and leveraging that. Like in this movie, you hit the nail on the head, man. I think Jason Reitman does such a good job of using Clooney's charm as a way of conveying something deeper. For years and years, Clooney has been compared to Cary Grant, and I saw it at many points in this movie because he turns on the charm and you're like, okay, I get it.
Dude, you know what he is, though? He is a slightly less pretentious and more approachable Cary Grant.
I feel like Cary Grant did his best, though, to take on roles that were making fun of, like the transatlantic thing and how he, you know what I mean? But I'm with you.
Yeah.
But what Reitman's doing in this movie with Clooney is he's demonstrating how Clooney could use that charm to disguise how lonely he is underneath it, right? Like he's a great talker. He can see right through everyone's bullshit. There's a couple scenes where people are talking to him and he realizes they're kind of giving him a form of a sales pitch. And he says, that was a nice touch. He's very self-aware. And yet you see how this like flirtatious, charming guy is using it to mask the fact that he's running away from any real relationships.
Yeah, the character as written, it's just so good. And then you hand it over to George Clooney, who I literally said this the other week, that there's certain roles that are just written for a specific character, right? We were talking about Jack Black in School of Rock. I don't think I can imagine anyone else in this role. Like, Clooney does such a masterful job of exactly what you said, Bob. He's able to draw in anyone. Like, he's somebody that is friends with anyone. And he says that to Anna Kendricks at one point. Like, I'm never alone. I always have people around. I have anyone I could talk to at any point. And yet, what she points out is true. Like, there's no depth. There's no really quality community around him. And the first time he really gets that is with this, 23-year-old who's forced to travel with him and a woman that he's casually sleeping with. And you see him become aware of that increasingly throughout the movie. And I think it's that character transition that I just love. Yeah. I just love how he portrays a man becoming more aware of the cost of his philosophy.
Mm-hmm. All right, I want to talk about Jason Reitman, the director, a little bit. He really splashed onto the scene in 2005 with a pretty incisive satire called Thank You for Smoking. That got a little bit of awards buzz, but it wasn't really like a big player that year. And then 2 years later, he makes Juno, which becomes Roger Ebert's favorite movie of that year. And Raj uses his juice to get that movie essentially nominated for Best Picture. Like, I don't think that movie would have gone on the awards spree that it did without Ebert kind of legitimizing it in the eyes of the general public. And then that's such a crowd-pleasing movie that once you get the general public on your side, it really bumped it up to being a contender that year. And he follows that up with this. And this one goes a little bit darker, a little bit more, I don't want to say existential.
This is straight up a dark comedy.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, it has a little bit more heart than that. Like, I think the ending of the movie is really hopeful, but he would go even more cynical and more dark with the follow-up to this movie called Young Adult, which is actually another movie on my list for this season. So I'm really excited to do that one, Brad. But I want to talk about Reitman in that I think this is like the perfection of what he's good at as a director. He's really been up and down for the last decade, and it seems like a lot of people have kind of turned against him because he is Ivan Reitman's son, who was a really famous director back in the 80s. You might know him from making Ghostbusters. Jason just directed the new Ghostbusters movie, and so everyone's kind of on the nepotism thing right now. But what I love about Reitman is he really, really threads the needle well between kind of cynical, biting comedy and then truly touching drama. And I think when he tries to go too far in either direction and leans wholly into comedy or wholly into drama, his movies don't feel as satisfying. But this one really strikes that balance well.
Yeah, I think what makes this movie run, like what really gives it legs to keep you interested, is the fact that you keep kind of bouncing back and forth between these amusing moments where Anna Kendrick is like crying in the hotel lobby, and then she's interviewing Vera Farmiga's character and Clooney about what it's like to get older. And moments like that are raw and honest and funny, and they genuinely cause you to like chuckle and laugh. And then there's moments where Anna Kendrick is sitting alone in a side office that they've put all the extra chairs in, like each chair representing the person that they have just fired that day. And it's just a beautiful shot. It sits on Anna Kendrick. Clooney walks in, says, "Hey, you okay?" And she just quietly nods yes in a way that says, "No, I'm not okay," and walks out.
Yeah.
And so like, there's so many beautiful moments like that. I love that Reitman chose to do like a documentary style interviews with people who had been fired. Like there was something about that it felt like When Harry Met Sally a little bit.
Yeah.
And it gave it this heartwarming, like, it felt very poignant. And you can't talk about this movie without mentioning the fact that the 2008 recession was really freaking hard.
Yeah. I mean, this movie is very timely in that way. And in a way that I think sometimes if there is a flaw to this movie, it kind of feels like they're trying to say something about the downsizing and things like that, but they're also not always able to connect that back to this central kind of character study of Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, I understand what they're trying to do. And they're saying like, he's doing this inherently evil thing in firing people, but trying to pretend like he has a heart behind it. And it's because he has this skewed idea of what relationships are supposed to be. And I get that. But sometimes I think on this watch through, Brad, the movie suffered a little bit because it felt like there were two separate movies at play, and it was like the corporate downsizing thing, and then it was like this guy overcoming his emotional deadness, and they didn't always seem to link up with each other.
This movie feels so connected to the recession of '08. It almost felt, and I will say a lesser version of what I'm about to mention. It's not quite as bad, but it kind of reminded me of The Dark Knight. Like that when we talked about The Dark Knight, we mentioned that this whole like government spying, you can't trust the government thing just felt weirdly placed, and it felt like political commentary in a movie that didn't need it. Mm-hmm. I felt that similarly, a little bit lesser, and it wasn't as obvious, but it felt similar. Like Reitman was trying to say something about the current state of affairs in America. But it felt a little disjointed, like you said, with the character development of Ryan Bingham, of the story being told between him and Alex and what's going to happen there. So yeah, I think you kind of see that especially when you move into like his decision to go home for his little sister's wedding and reconnect with his family, and all of a sudden that whole subplot falls away and it's gone for a while. Mm-hmm. And I'm with you, man. I feel like it was hard for Reitman to balance the two main thrusts of the movie in opposition to each other.
Yeah, and I think that, like, we'll talk about this in the second half of the episode, but I think that makes the ending, like the very, very end of the movie, suffer a little bit because I couldn't quite interpret what tone they were going for with the ending. And so, like, we'll get into talking about that. But before we get to break, Brad, I do want to talk about the two other leads of this movie, Vera Farmiga and Anna Kendrick. And I guess let's start with Anna Kendrick, because for a good chunk of this movie, you know, it's kind of like a buddy road trip movie. It's the two of them learning how to be this odd couple and work together and learning, you know, how to care for each other. Anna Kendrick is 24 years old when she makes this movie. She gets nominated for an Oscar. I think it's absolutely deserved.
I'd be the seventh person to do it. More people have walked on the moon.
Did they throw you a parade?
You get lifetime executive status. You get to meet the chief pilot, Maynard Finch.
Wow.
And they put your name on the side of a plane.
Men get such hard-ons from putting their name on stuff. You guys don't grow up. It's like you need to pee on everything.
Oh, now who's stereotyping?
Fear of mortality. It's like, yeah, you're gonna die one day.
And why do you suppose that's singular to men?
Probably because you can't have babies.
The baby argument.
If I had that many miles, I would show up at an airport, look at the destination board, pick a place, and go.
And like, I have tons of Anna Kendrick takes. I think Pitch Perfect ruined the trajectory of her career because I was so looking forward to seeing her as like, the new version of Anne Hathaway.
Yeah.
Which is kind of what I think this role was like gearing her up for. And then she took this complete different trajectory from there. But this movie is like, I see the promise. I see how good you are as an actress. I wish she would do more like this.
Yeah. I mean, you can't forget that she was also in Twilight before this movie.
Oh, that's true.
But no, dude, Anna Kendrick is just phenomenal in this film. I think that one of the things I loved about the script is the way that they set it up kind of like a Cary Grant, Audrey Hepburn style. For me, it kind of evoked that old movie trope where you have the older star fall in love with the young, starlet. And I love that they kind of subvert that casually by giving them such good, like you said, buddy chemistry, and B, they just flat out wrote a line in there like, no, I don't think of him that way. Like, he's old. And like the way Clooney takes quiet offense to that, but then also like looks in the mirror and is like, well, man, I am getting a little bit older.
Right.
There's something about that was so charming, and it makes her character eminently believable. I don't know. I thought she was written well. I thought that her performance was just really charming and really. I miss this version of Anna Kendrick where she's a little bit high strung, but eminently relatable.
All right. On the other hand, you have Vera Farmiga, who has really only been on this podcast, I think, once before for The Departed. This is 3 years after The Departed. She's 36 years old when she makes this movie. And I think it's really interesting how in the 3 years between The Departed and this movie, she goes from being like the love interest of a young Leonardo DiCaprio to being like, oh, I'm in a different generation. Like, I'm older and I'm more streetwise and I'm here with George Clooney. And, like, obviously a woman of whatever age can be with whatever person she wants to be. But it did feel like she wasn't quite old enough to be playing how old they wanted her to play.
Yeah.
And I kind of felt bad for Vera Farmiga as a result of that.
I think that for me, I thought they did a phenomenal job of portraying her as like a woman in her early to mid 40s. Mm-hmm. And, Clooney comes across as like, like a 52, 53-year-old. And so I thought they did a really good job. I did not know she was only 36. I genuinely would have guessed that she was like 43, 44.
Right.
The only like slight place where that felt awkward was like when Clooney goes to her house and she has like little kids running in the background. So that was the only place where it felt a little awkward. Other than that, I think that they wrote a character who, like you said, is kind of world weary, world wise, this person looking for, what I said at the start, a dalliance. Mm-hmm. And the age that she was played such a perfect role in that, because when they're sitting and talking to Anna Kendrick about what it's like to grow up a little bit, I thought that her performance was perfect. It's in that moment and in others, but I really love her in this movie when she is just sitting back, relaxing, and kind of dispensing wisdom. I thought that her performance was spectacular.
Yeah, she's really, really great in this movie. And, we talk about spoilers on this podcast, so if you haven't seen the movie, here's a spoiler warning. But, the first however many times I saw this movie, I really didn't like the way they made her character arc go, because it takes a left turn at the end of the movie. Like, Clooney has finally decided, after going home to Wisconsin and seeing the way that he can fit into his own family and, really be
he has a lasting impact on his sister's life.
That's what I'm saying. Like, really be of use to people, right? And he decides, like, I want to settle down. Like, I actually do want this. And so he kind of makes this desperate romantic gesture to Vera Farmiga by showing up at her house in Chicago. And then he finds out she's married and she has kids, and she's just been kind of using him as a dalliance, like you said.
Dude, that scene where she calls him a parentheses.
Oh my gosh. And how good is Clooney in that scene? Like, dude, acting against nothing, right? He's pretending someone's on the phone.
Yep.
Oh my gosh. So
his
good.
eyes are just brutalized when he realizes. But that's the beauty of this movie, man. He realizes that his philosophy, his backpack philosophy that he teaches on, has led him to being a parentheses. Like, he has no one to blame for this but himself.
And at the same time, I think that's why I don't mind what they did with Vera Farmiga's character, because look at their two lives, right? Like, she seems cold and heartless, but the reason she seems cold and heartless is because we're comparing her to Clooney, who's a guy with no relationships in his life, who's finally going all in on one. She's somebody who has been surrounded by a community of people and, may or may not be in a loveless marriage, who knows, but like, she's reaching out to have a fling, and she thinks that the rules were very clear here. And so I actually, like, when you dig a little deeper and you realize the reason that she comes across as the villain here is that you're comparing her to Clooney, and that it's kind of not fair to compare her to Clooney character-wise, I actually think her arc makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. Well, I think that her arc makes a lot of sense, but, I might be betraying my morals and ethics here, but she definitely is the villain. Like,
oh, for sure. For sure.
Clooney is honest from the start. I'm in this as a fling. It's casual. And he is challenged by Anna Kendrick in a really great scene where she's yelling at him like, this woman has gone through your weird criteria for what it takes to be in a relationship with you, and you're not even calling her more than a casual fling. Like, she deserves more than that. And if she wasn't married, then Anna Kendrick is 100% right.
Right.
But like, she's the one who's cheating on her husband. She's like she really is in the wrong here. And I think what I like about the ending is that when she exposes him for his philosophy, she calls him a parentheses. He's an asterisk. He's a fling. He's just a small piece of her life that she's trying to reach out to have fun with. I love the way it forces him to reckon with the way he's lived his life. And I think that it's hard and it's sad to see her have a family, and it makes me dislike her character a lot. But because the movie's not about her, the movie is about Ryan Bingham, it's about George Clooney, I think that the ending makes perfect sense. The whole movie is about this philosophy of, I take the fast lane. I don't carry too much. I follow Asians in the airport because they move through faster. Like, he has this philosophy of life that has left him empty. And I think it's fine that Reitman, as a writer and director for this movie, shows you this is the outcome of that philosophy. I think good movies should be able to do that. And wildly enough, I think it's very rare that a movie that I would genuinely consider this movie a comedy. I think it's rare that a comedy can bring about such a deep and meaningful message. And so that, I think that's why I'm so impressed with this movie, is that when you really are honest about the purpose of this film and what it says about the world, it's honest, it's brutal, it's raw. It calls you to live a better life where you pour into community around you. And if you don't, then, other people who have families, who have a community around them, are going to go to sleep and see your wingtips flying through the air as you are up in the air alone.
And I think that's a good place to put a pin in this, because I'm not sure if that's the final statement the movie wants to make, or if it actually wants to go a little farther than that. And I think we'll talk about that when we come back from the break. Brad, it's time for us to drink this whiskey. So what do you say we try Rebel Distiller's Collection?
Bro, I have been so pumped for this. Let's get to it. All right, guys. So today we are drinking Rebel's Distiller Collection. Now, guys, this is a product that was selected by OHLQ. Now, if you're not in the state of Ohio, Ohio is a price-controlled state, and as such, there is a government agency that runs everything. And I will say there's certain cons to that, certain things we don't love, but the OHLQ website is one of the best things in the world. You know exactly where your liquor is going to be, exactly what price it's going to cost, and if it's in stock. And the other cool thing that they do is they do barrel picks. They go out to different distillers and they do barrel picks and they bring them to the state of Ohio. And we are drinking today one of those picks. They went down to Lux Row. They picked 8 barrels of the Rebel Distillers Collection, and they sold it in Ohio for $40. So, Bob, I know you picked this bottle up a little while ago. All of these are bottled at 113 proof, which means it's kind of in that like Weller full proof stable of whiskey.
Yeah, it's basically like it could potentially be barrel proof, but it's not barrel proof because they dilute it from what it comes out at. So like everything is consistently at 113, which I'm okay with. I mean, I don't really love the language of full proof, and I railed against it with Weller, but if you think about this as Rebel's direct response to Weller Full Proof, that's pretty much what we're drinking here.
Yeah. I will say, though, while Weller uses this idea of full proof, I think that language is confusing. I don't see anything like that with this Rebel Distillers Collection.
No, not at all.
So I appreciate that they're straight up front. This is diluted down to 113 proof. We think it gives a better flavor profile, and that's that. Like I like the honesty there.
I do too. So Rebel has become probably our favorite budget brand on this podcast. We really liked the 80 proof so much that I said to myself, let's get the 100. We just got around to reviewing the 100 this season, but I've been raving about it on this podcast for, 3 seasons now.
Yeah.
For $20, there's not a better 100 proof bourbon. Then we tried the cask strength, which I was a little bit cooler on. And so this is kind of falling right in between in terms of proof points, the 100 proof and the cask strength. So Brad, we've talked a lot. Let's get into the review. What are you picking up on the nose of Rebel Distillers Collection?
Man, Bob, this is beautiful. I think that there's some really nice vanilla notes. To me, it comes across so peanut buttery that like there's just these really beautiful nutty notes that kind of mix with this little bit of honey. It's just buttery.
Yeah.
Like it's buttery. It's got peanuts on it. I adore this nose. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10.
I'm also going to give it a 9. My notes are a little different than yours, though. So I've had this poured out since we started talking about it. So about 5 minutes now. And at first it was very, very subtle, soft floral notes. Like, nothing too fragrant. Like, I don't know, a baby's breath or something, if I had to put something to it. And then it took on a lot of wheat. This is a wheated bourbon. It didn't smell like raw grain, but it smelled more just kind of like what I would imagine kind of like walking through a wheat field would smell like. You know what I mean? Like that kind of dustiness to it. And now it's really just taken on, for me, vanilla and root beer. Like this is a root beer float in my Glencairn. And I am absolutely loving it, man. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10 as well.
Dude, when you said you were walking through a wheat field, all I could see was like Russell Crowe's hand playing with stalks of wheat.
All right, man, let's take a sip.
Oh my gosh, dude. That's a whiskey.
Yeah. So I may have wrecked my palate today, Brad. About an hour before we recorded, I made the mistake of eating Chipotle. And then I said, shoot, I have to taste whiskey. So what I did, I like chugged a bunch of water. Yep. I also drank a really bad whiskey before we started, just to like reacclimate my palate to whiskey. And I think that it pretty much reset me. But I will say, slightly different tasting experience today versus when I first cracked this bottle a couple weeks ago. It's a lot oakier. I wasn't expecting it to have this much oak on it. And I'm interested to hear what you have to say, Brad, because I have some notes in mind from the first time I tried it, but I don't want to influence you.
I don't know, man. For me, it has really nice caramel notes that I didn't quite get as much on the nose. It gets a little sweeter on the palate, but there's still a nice savory nuttiness. The butter really comes through. It's very creamy. The viscosity isn't terribly high.
No, it's pretty thin.
For a 113 proof, I was expecting it to be a little thicker. So that was a little bit disappointing. Overall, though, I really like this palette a lot. I think I'll give it an 8 out of 10.
I'm going to do the same. And again, this is the danger of getting a single barrel. And the wonderful thing about OHLQ is that they put tasting notes for all 8 of their barrels on their website. And the first barrel that hit my part of the state was the one that sounded the worst. It was like something about green tea and it tasted tannic. And I was like, absolutely not. Like, I don't want that. So I waited until I saw a bottle on the shelf somewhere from a different barrel. And then I just bought that. So, this one, they do talk about toasted oak. And like, I kind of get that. It does remind me a little bit of the Elijah Craig toasted barrel where it doesn't taste as charred, but like it kind of tastes almost like raw wood a little bit. And I think that is like the biggest detraction for me. I will say, Brad, the finish is pretty nice. Like, it doesn't stay super sweet on my palate, but it's also not very aggressive for being 113 proof. I think like all of the tingle and the heat is on the palate, and the finish is just a very nice, long-lasting, mouth-watering finish. So I think I'm going to up my score to an 8.5 on the finish.
Yeah, I was actually literally just typing out 8.5. I think that the finish gets a little bit oaky, but the primary flavors that I have found throughout are still there. It lasts a while. It's got a really nice Kentucky hug. I really like it. I'm going to give it an 8.5. And when you consider balance, I don't think that this whiskey is incredibly complex. And I will say that when we're getting into the upper echelons of whiskey, I think that complexity starts to be the thing that bumps me from like an 8.5 to a 9 or a 9 to a 9.5. So I think I'm going to stick at an 8.5 for balance. And there's no knocks there. It's a well-balanced whiskey. It's just not super complex in the way that I think pushes some whiskeys up into the upper echelon.
Yeah, I'm also going to give it an 8.5 on balance. And again, at the price point that we're dealing with here, which is $40, I'll move into price. I don't think this is as good as Wild Turkey Rare Breed. But I also don't want to completely knock it because it's a single barrel. So like, we may have just gotten a barrel that is not in our preferred kind of flavor profile. And this is, again, why Brad and I are always saying I would rather have a small batch bourbon than a single barrel bourbon. It's just, there's too much variation. Unless I'm picking the barrel for myself and I know exactly what I'm looking for, you're taking a gamble when you pick up a bottle of it. So you do kind of have to factor that in. I think the price is unbelievable. Like, it is absolutely worth $40 with the caveat that you might get a barrel that's a little bit not to your taste. So I think I'm going to fall at an 8 out of 10 on value, Brad.
Bob, I think we're going to have the same score here. I'm also at an 8 out of 10 on value. This is a really delicious whiskey. It might not be quite at the upper echelon of whiskeys we've tried on this podcast, but it is damn near close. And if you're able to get your hands on it, it's obviously a bit of a rarity. Man, for $40, this is a heck of a buy. I would fully recommend it, Bob. I'm coming out to a 42 out of 50. Where are you at?
Well, I'm at a 42. We did come out to the exact same score. It's really good, guys. I still don't know if I was ranking all of the Rebel products, I don't know if I would put this above 100. I still think Rebel 100 is a lock for me in terms of just complete enjoyment. Is it the best whiskey I've ever had? No, but it's $20 and it's really close to being, it's in the, Brad, I would say that like Rebel 100 is top 25% just in terms of flavor profile of like what I'm looking for. And this is there too. It's just $40,
Yep. Yeah, no, I totally understand that. Bob, I think this was a knock out of the park purchase though. I can't think of a better whiskey to pair with such a phenomenal movie. So how about we get back into Clooney, Farmiga, Reitman, their what I would genuinely consider a modern classic in Up in the Air.
Let's get to it, Brad. All right, that was Rebel Distiller's Collection, a whiskey that we both really loved. It came out over 40 on our 50-point scale. It's a no-brainer pickup if you see it at the store. We're getting back into talking about Up in the Air, and it's time for our new segment, Two Facts and a Falsehood. This is where Brad tries to stump me with movie-related trivia that he probably got on IMDb, and we can't verify if it's actually true. So, let's see. Brad, are you ready to give me your two facts and a falsehood?
Bob, I am. Fact number 1. The original script for this movie, which was not written by Jason Reitman, had Vera Farmiga's character leaving her husband for Clooney, but that was one of the few rewrites that Reitman made, and he felt that it was too obvious of a choice, and felt like it would be better to leave Clooney at the end of the movie still up in the air.
There it is.
You get it?
I think I do.
Yeah. Fact number 2. When Bob, played by the illustrious J.K. Simmons, shows Ryan a photo of his 2 children, it is a photo of Simmons' real-life children.
Okay.
Fact number 3. The movie originally opened with the Ryan Bingham scene when he's on the plane and he was being asked by the flight attendant if he wants the cancer. Yeah, it's, the can, comma, sir.
Sure.
But at testings of this movie, the audience was kind of confused for the rest of the movie, thinking that it was going to be a drama about cancer. So they scrapped it from being the opening scene, pushed it back a little bit, and kept the scene in the movie.
Huh. I don't know. I'm going to say 2 is true. 1 and 3 are like, none of these were like bombshell things that I was like blown away by. Like they both could be true. They both could be just made up. I'm going to say 1 is the falsehood. I know Reitman wrote this script with a co-writer, but I'm not sure if there were earlier drafts of it. So I'm going to go ahead and say 1 is the falsehood.
1 is, in fact, the falsehood.
Yeah.
Robert.
Oh, man. Brad, you got me in week 1, but I'm 3 for 3 since then.
You are. I am currently 1 for 4. One of the wild things I learned about this movie is that the original script writer and Jason Reitman never actually met.
Yeah. Do you know how they do that in screenplay credits? Like when you watch the credits of a movie, if it has, I might get this backwards, but if it has an ampersand between the 2 people that wrote it, it means they wrote it like physically together, like collaborators.
Okay.
And if it says the word "and," it means that like one person revised a former draft from somebody else and they didn't work in collaboration. So like sometimes when a movie has 4 writers, it'll be like writer A ampersand B, and then it'll say the word "and" C ampersand D. And it means like 2 people wrote one draft and then someone was like, this is shit. And so C and D came in together and rewrote that. It's just so crazy how they convey that.
It feels like a industry, like internal way of snubbing people.
Yeah, right.
Be like, we didn't even give you an ampersand, you idiots.
All right, Brad, I want to talk a little bit about the end of the movie because I do still struggle with it. And I think I finally put my finger on what Reitman's trying to go for here. And in full disclosure, like I went and found the screenplay of this movie and like read the last scene in the screenplay to see what he was trying to convey.
Dude.
I do my research, man.
It's impressive. You make me proud.
Thank you. So Clooney says, people all over the world are going to be putting their children into bed and above head, the stars will be wheeling forth or something. And he says...
He goes like full Matthew McConaughey for a second there.
In Interstellar?
No, I was thinking more the Lincoln commercials.
Just in a commercial. And the stars will wheel forth from there.
Yeah.
And he says, and one star brighter than the rest will be my wingtip. And it kind of seems at first like what's happening is Clooney decided as a character to reach out, to make an effort, to try to give his heart over to somebody, and he got crushed. And now he's retreating back into, I'm just going to fly away from everything. But I don't actually think that's what's happening here. And I think if you read the screenplay, go ahead.
The way he delivers the line is too uplifting for it to be that.
Yeah. And I think that what Reitman was trying to do, because in the screenplay, like it makes a big point of the fact that he like lets go of his rollaway, like his luggage, and kind of walks away from it. And it says the second he takes a step away from it, we cut to the clouds. And it is kind of tricky because I think he wants you to be wondering like, oh, is he going to go try to find something out there for him, or is he going back to the clouds again? Because the title of the movie's up in the air. The idea for so much of the film is that Clooney is trying so hard to convince himself, like, I don't need anything, I don't need anybody, and he has no destination in mind. Everywhere is the same. And so for him, when he's flying, the destination is not where he's landing. It's the clouds. It's this act of being completely removed from everybody and everything. And at the end of the movie, it's a callback to something that Anna Kendrick says earlier in the film, where she's talking about, like, if I had that many miles, I would just go stand in front of the departure board and pick a city and go. And you can see that he's kind of doing that. And in the scene before that, his boss, Jason Reitman, is sending him back out and basically says, like, just don't come home. I know you don't want to come home, so just fly and fly forever. And you can kind of see Clooney like, do I want to keep doing this, knowing that I'll never find a connection? Or do I want to go out there and try to find something for myself, knowing I could get my heart broken again? And I think I love that they don't resolve it, but they kind of do. You know what I mean? And when we get to young adult, it's a very similar character arc here to the one that Ryan takes, in that, like, someone challenges the main character, and at the end of the movie, she has the choice to, like, go back to her own ways or to become a better person. And so it's a really interesting contrast. But Brad, I guess I'm just looking for, like, what's your interpretation of the ending? Do you think it's a hopeful one? Do you think it's a tragic one? And, like, what cues are you using to come to that?
Weirdly, I'm glad we watched The Aviator again, because the ending of this movie weirdly reminds me of the end of The Aviator. That at the end of it, is there hope that, you know, Leo's character is actually getting help? He has a community around him. He doesn't have to be alone in his struggle anymore. And I think we're kind of at the same place at the end of this movie. Does Clooney's character have to struggle with the weight of his philosophy anymore? Or is he going out into the world no longer to separate himself from it, but in order to integrate himself into the world around him? Is he going forth in order to find community? I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that's the beauty of this movie, is that there might be certain parts of your life where you watch this film and you leave it just going, nope, like, there's no hope. He's not going to find anybody. And there's other parts of your life where you go, man, like, he's really making a change, and he's really going to try to put some people into his backpack, if you will. Mm-hmm. I don't know, man. I think it's a really brilliant ending that leaves it in the hands of the audience. I think that Reitman, as a director, respects the people watching his film enough to let them make the choice.
Yeah. I do think if there's one flaw to the ending, it feels a little rushed, and it feels like even if you were going for an ambiguous ending, I almost was kind of wondering, like, it was like I was trying to catch up to it and going, like, wait, what's going on? Like, what's he doing? And then the movie was over. And I felt like it could have had a little bit more emotional impact if they had drawn it out just a little bit longer. Brad, I don't know about you, but, like, I'm ready to give my final score here. This is a movie that at one point I had ranked as, like, the second or third best movie of the 21st century. This movie was, like, sacred to me in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And last night I watched it and I was like, oh, I feel like, I don't know if I've just grown out of this movie in some ways or what, but, like, there were some scenes that I was like, oh, they could have edited that better. Or, like, you know, like at the beginning, the Zach Galifianakis cameo, where they kind of go into this weird fantasy sequence of crazy things people do when they're fired. And it felt like it was from a completely different movie. They didn't need any of that. They never really integrate the stories of, like, the recession and the people getting fired into this character study, which feels very much like the Ryan Bingham part of this movie could have been like a 1970s film. They loved their character studies, and it has that kind of vibe to it. But then there's, like, the weird comedy parts of it where they're like, oh, isn't Zoom the worst? You know what I mean? It doesn't seem like it always is cohesive. And so it suffered a little bit for me. And I came out thinking, like, oh man, am I going to give this like an 8.5, which is still really good. I think I'm going to land at a 9 out of 10, Brad. This is still a really, really good movie. I'm a little bummed that I no longer think it's a 10, but there were just a couple things for me that couldn't allow me to give it that score.
Yeah. I think I'm going to land at the same final score, Bob. I think that this movie is a 9 out of 10, and I came into it hoping to give it a 9.5. Mm-hmm. I'm right there with you. There's certain parts of this movie that just didn't quite land, that kept it from being transcendent in a way that a 9.5 or a 10 out of 10 kind of requires that it be. I think that the parts that this movie does well, though, is how Reitman is just very honest as a director and sincere in the way he portrays his characters. You know, even thinking about the wedding, he took local film crews like videographers and had them shoot a real life, honest to goodness wedding. And they had him do it 3 separate times with the same wedding and just have fun with it. And I have to say, as somebody who worked professionally in the wedding industry for a while, the scenes that he shot of the wedding felt so incredibly authentic to what a real wedding feels like and looks like. And it made me fall in love with the character of Ryan Bingham and of Alex. And it made me fall in love with the normalcy of their lives. I think Reitman just knocks it out of the park as a director here. And so, yeah, for me, it's an easy 9 out of 10. I think this is a phenomenal movie that more people need to see. It blows my mind that this has a 7.4 out of 10 on IMDb. I think it is a much, much better movie than that.
For sure. I would encourage people to watch this movie. It is absolutely worth a watch. It's hilariously funny. Like, it's the comic timing. We've barely talked about it, but you're right. Dude. I would categorize this primarily as a comedy that has more to say. It's an entertaining movie. It gets at some deep questions. Please go out and watch Up in the Air. But Brad, it's time for us to pick next week's movie, which is coming off of your list. Brad, you only have 5 movies left as the wheel spins here. It looks like we are going to be watching, our second Doug Liman movie of the season. We're watching Tom Cruise's Edge of Tomorrow. Talk about a slept-on movie if there ever was one.
Bob, I think that this is one of the best action movies of the 21st century.
Absolutely, man. I cannot wait to talk about that one. All right, Brad, that wraps it up for us today. We will be back next week to talk about Edge of Tomorrow. But until then, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time.